Brexit, take back control, get Brexit done, leave means leave, the will of the people. We've all heard the slogans and now we're all heading towards that divorce from the European Union. But what does that mean for the car industry? Specifically, the rules that cars sold in Britain will have to abide by. I'm talking about exhaust noise, emissions levels, safety, and the very types of cars that we allow on our roads. We all know by now that the EU has endless rules in place that car makers have to follow if they want to do business in Europe and avoid getting massive fines. But now the UK's left the EU, surely we don't have to follow those rules. The theory is that after Brexit, UK cars can make as much noise as they like, Ford could bring back the Focus RS over here, low CO2 emissions will be a distant memory, and we could have a wider variety of cars, right? Well, it's a good theory, and yeah, hypothetically, the UK can now make its own rules on cars. In principle, we don't have to stick to the same regs as the EU, but notice I said hypothetically because the reality is quite different. Here's the thing, car companies don't just do business in one country. The big ones, Fords, Teslas, Mercedes-Benzes, they sell cars in a variety of regions from the UK to America to China and yeah, in Europe. And what tends to happen is they design their cars to work in multiple markets. Usually they'll try to have the same engines, the same gearboxes, the same interiors, the same materials, the same technology across different markets with only the minimum of changes. The idea is that if they standardize parts and standardize design, they can save money by not having to make loads of changes from one region to another. The Land Rover Defender is going to be built in Slovakia, and the versions intended for America are going to be largely identical to the ones sold here in the UK, apart from a couple of tweaks to the side marker lights, for example. Don't get me wrong, sometimes changes have to be made from region to region. Bugatti had to fit these hideous bumpers to the back of the American market Chiron, but they didn't actually want to do that. By the way, that one goes out to all my American friends out there saying, we don't got no rules, America. Yeah, you got rules, bro. I might drop a video. Anyway, back to Europe and the UK specifically. The EU rules were actually quite handy for car makers in the sense that they guaranteed consistency. When you've got a consistent set of rules, you can guarantee that everyone trading in the market makes products to a set of approved standards. Nobody cuts corners, nobody has to make lots of different versions of the same car for lots of different countries. That's why the German Golf is basically the same as the French Golf, or the Swedish 3 Series is the same as the one you get in Spain and Scotland and Wales. Currently, it's a nice, easy way to do business, and when Brexit comes around, no one will actually want to change that. Why would they? Let's just say for a minute that someone in Parliament really wanted louder exhausts. They don't, by the way, I promise you. Watch this video. They've actually started using noise cameras to catch people whose cars are too loud, believe it or not. But let's just say for a minute that they did. Why would Mercedes then go through the trouble of designing and building an A45 for Europe and then spending extra time and energy and money making a slightly louder, less efficient one for the UK? It's very unlikely to happen. Manufacturers generally prefer less complex lineups and less configuration. They prioritize the cars that are guaranteed to sell in the majority of countries. If they build a bunch of unique versions for the UK with multiple differences to EU versions, then they risk not being able to sell them. Simplification is important. The other issue is that even though the UK has Brexited itself, there's no guarantee that we'll stop following EU rules on car design. Just because we've left the EU, it doesn't mean that we're suddenly going to draw up a new set of rules for ourselves. Once the UK is out, it's up to Parliament to decide whether to keep our current rules or to scrap them and make new ones. The rules we follow in the EU will carry on until someone, somewhere, makes a conscious decision to do something different. And even if they did change the rules, the bosses at BMW, who have devoted billions of euros to get in line with EU rules, aren't going to say, hey, UK, here's an M5 with a dirtier exhaust. They'll just give us the cars they made for the bigger market, the EU. And the irony is that if the EU changed their rules, because we're not in it anymore, we're not going to get much of a say in those changes. We're just going to have to take what we're given. So what about British cars? Jags, Land Rovers, for example, they can do what they like, right? After Brexit, they're British companies making British cars. Well, no, you see, because they sell cars in the EU, they have to abide by the rules of the EU. You can't go into someone's supermarket and sell your apples without following the rules of whoever runs that supermarket. So that applies to existing cars. What about cars that don't exist anymore, like the Focus RS or other cars that have been killed off, or cars that are under threat in the EU because they're not compatible with the latest regulations? Could they bring back the Focus RS only in the UK, for example? Well, maybe. If the UK did bother to change their rules and distance themselves from EU regulations, and there's no guarantee that will happen, then it's possible. But the likelihood of Ford doing that is extremely low because the UK is a smaller market. They wouldn't sell enough RSs here to make it worthwhile. It wouldn't be economically viable to bring back that car and only sell it in one place. I've spoken to a few of my contacts in the car industry about this, and the reality is they're actually pretty happy with most of the EU rules on car design. Sure, they get frustrated with having to meet certain criteria, but most of them will admit that having one set of standards is better than having lots of different standards in lots of different countries. And a lot of the rules are actually quite good. Maybe I'll do a video on EU rules that have actually made cars better over the last decade or so. Anyway, that's the state of play. I guess whether you're with it or against it, the answer to the question of whether British cars will be different after Brexit, all signs point to no. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure you hit that like button. And if you've learned something new, then please do consider subscribing. As always though, make sure you come back very soon for another video very shortly, because we drop hot new content all the time. And until then, we'll see you soon. Peace.